going. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Balls in Your Face Marketing. Today, we are going to be talking about business strategy, and I have with me today a very interesting keynote speaker and author, Yoseph Elkaim. On the show, man.
Likewise, thank you for having me. Humble.
So what I should have mentioned right off the bat, that you have a new book coming out in the new year. It's called Hubris, and you're going to be dismantling the American business infrastructure as it stands.
Correct.
Is this what I understand? Tell me a little bit about the thesis behind the book.
Sure. So effectively, through about 2 decades of being in management consulting, I've been in a space where I've gotten a chance to see firsthand where some businesses are effectively really successful. Other businesses, fundamentally fail miserably. And what I've kind of been able to take away from that is the book represents my perspective on why certain businesses exceed expectations and why some businesses just fundamentally fall below. And what I've consolidated it down to was 4 principal ideas, right? So someone in executive leadership effectively either didn't know what was going on, didn't care what was going on, didn't know enough to care, or didn't care enough to know. And when you can kind of calibrate your overarching business culture to identifying and addressing one of those 4 key pain points, it becomes very simple. It becomes a question of people, process, product, and technology. What your business does is important. How your business effectively does it is also important. But why people should subscribe to how you do your business, what your overarching ethos is, that's probably exponentially more important, because product and services come and go. But meeting expectations and identifying and solidifying your purpose around those expectations is probably what the difference is between having a company and a legacy.
Right. Okay. And when you're talking about it at that level in terms of somebody within the sort of executive branch, but what about just a startup? Because that's, I think, really when we're talking about small, like mom and pop businesses, it's those startups that are most likely to fail.
Absolutely.
So how does that fit in?
So I think it's twofold, right? So I think it's important. At least there's a distinction that I like to make that resonates with people who follow my content, that resonates with people who interact with me on a more ethereal level. There's an important distinction, right? Small business owners own small businesses. Entrepreneurs solve problems. It's a substantive difference, because effectively there's a lot of bravado that's going around LinkedIn, that's going around Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. I'm an entrepreneur. I have this cultural mindset that I'm going to turn around and I'm going to bring a new offering to the table. There's novelty in that. Godspeed. But the reality is that Mark Cuban, Kevin O'Leary, Robert Herjavec, and like how I tapped in and kept the Canadian last, right? So
I appreciate that.
The value proposition sits in the fact that at some point you might just very well be a person with a novel idea, but then you're just a business owner. Mm-hmm. What is the problem you're solving, right? That's effectively the real value proposition. If you can identify how you're changing the game, you're flipping the script, you're forcing a change in the conversation, you're shifting the paradigm of the narrative, whether it be in your industry, your culture, your mindset, your purview, that, my friend, that's entrepreneurship. Because at that point, you've changed the narrative. And when I can make that distinction, where what you do is so critical, sits at the very nexus of all of that. Marketing is such an integral component to all of that. And that's why I'm so stoked to be on the podcast, because I think it's important that Well, and we'll get into that, but effectively, that's why I think it's so important to make that distinction. It's great to be entrepreneurial, but you can be an entrepreneurial small business owner without being an entrepreneur. But the opposite is not true. That and that distinction is important for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think what you're getting at is the heart. I mean, entrepreneurship has been a part of humanity and human existence and business operations forever. It is the mechanism really from which our economies grow. But I think what you're getting at is very much the heart of what has always been true, versus I think, you know, what is the sort of cachet and recent sort of popularization of entrepreneurship, which for sure there is. And I think that's a very interesting kind of thing to kind of like take apart, because, you know, like part of it I think is that there's a force that is compelling us towards more entrepreneurship anyways, whether, you know, like this is an industry as you know, factories and businesses are able to, as you said, you know, use technology more effectively, efficiently, and remove a lot of the sort of human processes. Well, that displaces a lot of people, and how things reconfigure, I think part of that again has compelled it. But you're right that there is this sort of younger generation. You and I have talked in the past about Gary Vaynerchuk, and I think that's exactly it. That's a perfect example of a lot of young people not having a distinct personality themselves or product or service themselves. They're simply emulating him and saying, oh, that's the face, that's what an entrepreneur is. And he is somebody with bravado. And again, all the power to him, because, you know, I mean, he's an original. First of all, he was kind of opening up that landscape first. Right. And two, that's just him, and that's his nature, and that doesn't, you know, and that's not true to you. And also, he had a very unique message and product and service and so forth. So I agree that there's this, you know, oh, okay, I'm an entrepreneur, without really knowing what it means. And for sure, if that's where your starting point is, you're right. Those are not going to succeed.
But there's something equally interesting, right? And I think a lot of people, and I think your point is well taken, because it highlights a very interesting, at least in my view, an oversight. Many people think it's impressive, and don't get me wrong, this isn't the, you know, the accolade or denigrate podcast. Like, I'm not looking to take this into that direction. I give everybody their due. And everybody who does meaningful things, but don't fool yourself. Gary, Simon, Seth Godin, Tom Bilyeu, I don't give a damn who you pick. They have put function over form, as opposed to form over function. What that means is simple. They still operate under conventional business model guidelines. They still calibrate their business expectations to meet regulatory and legal expectations and adherence models. They still run a business, people, process, product, technology. They're still operating within the conventional confines. So don't fool yourself. It's still function over form. Yeah. Whereas the narrative, the cultural, the shift in mindset, the paradigm that you're seeing today is, well, I have a sexy new product. I have a sexy new go-to-market strategy. I have a sexy new branding. Well, that's great. But the people that are overarchingly regulating, evaluating, auditing the core of your business, they haven't changed. Right. Neither their rule-based or their risk-based tick boxes haven't changed either. So while I appreciate that you've brought a new cog, so to speak, into the proverbial wheel, you're still needing to operate within the confines of a traditional business format.
That's right.
And that's why what you guys are doing is so integral, because with such an appetite, with such an aggressive movement into new and emerging, where does marketing fit in? How do you guys, how do you manage expectations of the people who are trying to do such meaningful new things, while still taking into account, well, I get where you're going, bud, but this is where you need to kind of reel it back in to meet, how business is really done.
Right, right. And I think, the role of marketing becomes that, as I think you're right, that it is a very sort of integral role, and it's the role of identifying, I guess, first insight, and converting insight into action. Really, I think that's where the shift or the difference, really what has happened is that the only difference that I can see from, let's say, like a modern business to traditional business is in how traditional businesses were a lot more siloed. Yeah. And again, that's because the cycle of regular business cycles used to be fairly long. And so, for example, back in the day when we would be advertising on TV or in magazines and so forth, you're buying month-long campaigns well in advance of actually doing them. You're not really getting the data for months after the fact. And once you do get that data, it's fairly limited in comparison to the kind of data that you're able to get.
Absolutely.
So what has emerged in our industry, right, is Agile. That was the Agile methodology and responsive thinking, because of how quick and how fast everything goes. So right now you can go talking about, those products, right? You can go from product,
right,
very quickly to, get it in front of the people, gauge the people's response to it, modify your product, modify your process, all through the technology, right? All of those things. Technically, really, like that whole process actually really can happen in a week.
Right.
Right. Like I can, throw out some dynamic ads now on Facebook, right? With like, okay, here's 3 different variations of ad copy. Here's 3 different images. Facebook, tell me, which one do you think is the best combination? And within 3 days, I think Facebook will give me a good sense of what the winner is.
It's almost an ingrown in-house focus group. It's crazy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting now that I'm seeing, when I look at a business, I value my ability of breaking down a strategy. I look at a business and, in 2 decades of being in this space, I'm patting my own back, but I think I've managed to successfully, I can come into a business and in the first 20 minutes effectively break down a strategy of a particular business line that I'm focused on. I can tell you effectively where I anticipate the bottlenecks to be and how to build that out forward.
Well, Yoseph, rather than you feeling like as though you're patting yourself on your back, right, let me invite the question. Let me ask you. Tell us your story. Tell us the background of how you came to this point.
I tell everybody that I'm no David Goggins. I'm none of those. I didn't have to tape a leg in order to run a marathon. I've gone through my own trials and tribulations leading up to. I grew up in an insular, Orthodox Jewish family that was very, very siloed. I mean, in some ways, we had a very overarching disposition towards culture, heritage, legacy, as it related to faith and so forth. And I guess my trajectory was one of which I was planning to be a rabbi, and I even explored that. Wasn't for me. Right. My parents were supportive people, I guess, in their own right. My dad, like every other immigrant story, was a person who came to the U.S., very nominal amounts of money in his pocket, came in and effectively said, I'm here to make a very substantive change in my life, which can ultimately blah, blah, blah. I like to make the joke that when my dad got to, Customs and Border Protection, they asked him, what's your purpose of coming here? He says, I'm here for the American dream. And they said, yeah, well, we don't do that anymore. So, and effectively he doubled down on a very strong work ethic. And that kind of cascaded down on my brother and my sister and I. Mm-hmm. When you come from a Middle Eastern family, there's an overarching stereotype that says, well, you're either a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure. And, with my caveat, I'm not going to say that wasn't the case, but in my situation, my dad basically said, well, doctors are great, only if you could write a prescription. So any interest in teaching, in PhD level academia, if you couldn't effectively write a prescription, it didn't really constitute. So I ended up leaning more towards like the legal environment and law and so forth and so on. And I ventured into that space, and I didn't find it was for me. But what I did find, I fell in love with the business of business. And why that's important is because I like how things work. I like data. I like ingestion of data. I like how cogs work together to effectively keep the machine rolling. And I said, I feel like I can do this. And I was a practitioner. I started out right after college, like everybody else. I took my bones. I went into a really great consultancy. I moved on to a different consultancy. I made my bones there, you know, and what I realized is in almost every situation where we were working with clients that were really impactful, there was this undercurrent, this common denominator of what I socialized to you from, you know, prior to the podcast, is that businesses succeed or fail based on 4 key reasons. Someone in an executive leadership position either doesn't know what's going on, doesn't care what's going on, doesn't know enough to care, or doesn't care enough to know. And I said, well, if I can look at my experience and figure and take and extrapolate all the things that I've done that have actually helped businesses be effective and grow and substantive and profitable, and consolidate those best practices or those key lessons into a strategic offering, I think that I can have a meaningful value proposition in and of itself.
Right.
That was a very manual process for me for quite a while. Then I fell in love with tech, and I said, now I have the ability to incorporate AI, cognitive and predictive analytics, and you know, and natural language processing and RPA, and that only expedited my ability to take the operational efficiency, ensure the customer experience by way of data quality. Right. And it's just been meaningful for me as a differentiator for who I am and why I do what I do, but more specifically, the outcomes of what customers can expect by way of working with me. And that for me has just been, it's been crazy. I won't lie to you, it came at a tremendous cost. A tremendous cost. I have a beautiful wife. I have 2 amazing kids, and you know, it came at almost being virtually absentee. That sucks. And anyone who tells you that they haven't had to eat a pile in order to get to where they are is lying to you.
Yeah.
Mine came at 38. I was at a client in Canary Wharf in London. I was there with a colleague who looked over at me. And again, I'm just so American in so many ways, but I'm so Canadian in other ways. Because I was saying, yeah, no worries. Well, the hell before I knew it was a Canadian thing to do, by the way, just FYI. But like, and I just have a very, you know, I'm sensitive and I'm conscious of what I do, but I have a very overarchingly smooth disposition on most things. And at this client, I guess a colleague of mine noticed that I wasn't looking too hot. And he said, hey, are you okay? And I thought maybe it was just me looking at a place within the larger British culture. I was like, yeah, maybe it's hot in here. Maybe my tie is not loose enough, whatever the case was. I woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed with an IV and an oxygen tubing up my nose. And I turned to my colleague and I'm like, okay, dude, what the hell am I doing here? and he turns to me and he says, you really don't know? I said, no, honest to God, I really have no idea. He says, dude, you had a major cardio arrhythmia. You went face first into the client's table. I was like, come on, you're like punking me or something. I thought he was like, you know, whatever. And he's like, no, that happened. The next thing I asked him was, yeah, it's freaky. It's crazy. The next thing I asked him was, I said, you know, did we win the work? And he turns to me and he's like, I don't know where I can go with this verbally.
You can say whatever. You can say.
It's like, are you out of your goddamn mind? I said, why do you say that? He's like, dude, I just told you I had a heart attack. And the first thing you're asking me is, did we win the work? And I'm like, well, that's why we're here, isn't it? And years later, I would reflect on this. And what I came to realize was, I've never seen a U-Haul trailer strapped to the back of a hearse, ever. And if effectively we're doing all of this under the false pretense that we're going to take all of this money, this accolade, all these things with us when we go 6 feet into the ground, that's nonsense.
Right.
So what I started to think about was, how do I take what I do for a living at the business level and calibrate it into a mindset shift? So I did. I said, data quality. Am I giving somebody quality in the conversation, in my engagement, in my visceral relationships? Is that being reciprocated back to me? Data quality. Operational efficiency. Am I maximizing my time with Julian today? Are you getting what you need out of me? Am I getting what I need out of you? I need to rethink how I spend my time and my effort. And then ultimately tying this all in, and again, I could go through it piece by piece, but tying it all into marketing, do I represent the most meaningful reason for you to take a call? Do I represent the most meaningful takeaway by doing business with me? There are people that are mentors to me that, when you ask them, what do you do? They'll say, what do you need me to do? Well, that's not me. What do? I save you from yourself. If you're a business owner, you're effectively, the best you can aspire to in most cases is second place. Let's change that. Let's subscribe to a different mindset. Let's do what you do differently so that you don't have to be on a race to the bottom. And that's really how I look at my value.
You know what? It's very interesting. I mean, there's a lot of little components of that backstory and so forth that I can somewhat relate to, or that I can at least connect to. Sure. On a number of levels. Almost, said too many in a way. I've almost started to go. I didn't even know necessarily where to start there. No. But what I think one of them in part was about. It's funny how likewise having worked with a whole bunch of different businesses, worked in different companies, and a lot of different business owners. It's funny actually, now that I realize it, listening to you speak, how often I've had the thought of like, wow, okay, here's another common trait of an entrepreneur, of a business owner, somebody who founded a business. How often, like, what a very consistent personality type that is. Yeah. And so it's very funny that, me going into it, actually, I've been very conscious of that, of like, am I making those similar mistakes? Yep. But then also, I think the thing there is just, again, exactly like how often, we are our own obstacle. Yeah. And exactly, like that is an interesting sort of way to market yourself, as you said. Like, my job is to save you from yourself. Yeah. I think actually is outstanding branding, by the way. Wow.
Like, I think you said it earlier, right? With any movement, with any disruption, its inception, its root cause sits in a delusional sense of optimism in whoever it is that's making the conscious and cognitive decision, right? So here I am, I'm going to go start a podcast. It's going to be epic.
Right.
And I don't even have to take that too far. Like, I'm an American. Look at our president, right? It's going to be huge.
Huge.
It's going to be epic. Huge. It's going to be iconic. But that has nothing to do with a false sense of reality as much as it has to do with an overarching sense of optimism.
Right.
And if you don't have that, you're doomed from the outset. And that's not anything that you can be told. Like I said, I love all the people I mentioned earlier, all these influencers. They're all great. They bring tremendous stuff. I know for me, Impact Theory, I start my morning coffee with that show every day. Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan. By the way, I don't get paid or endorsed by that show, and I can't even get on it. So just to go show you, it's not like a net win for me by chance. My point in saying that is that I appreciate it and I ingest it for what it is. But I also recognize that the value that it brings to me is also in what it's not. There's a lot of people that are out there selling you, I do this and I do this and I do that and I do that. So does everyone else. I want to do business with you because you're not like everybody else. I want to do business with you because you're willing to disrupt the status quo to effectively bring substantive and impactful autonomy and change by why you're doing it. And that's the beauty of where I see the cross connect, the nexus, if you will, between the marketing and branding people that I talk to and business owners. Mm-hmm. Because compelling that story, weaving that tapestry, it's no joke, man. That's a hell of a job.
Yeah.
And to be able to do it and do it well, that's talent.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Because I mean, and there's never been a time where it's been more appropriate for disruption, sure. for reconsidering. And I mean, it's being forced upon us anyways, again, just by so much, just so much change. Like, I mean, more, probably more technological developments in the last decade than, in maybe the entire history of humanity.
No, you're bang on. You're absolutely bang on. I mean, you and I connected by way of LinkedIn, right? So, or through Deborah, who's unbelievable, by the way, and deserves a plug, right? Mm-hmm. Deborah Kerbel, by the way, just FYI. And what's interesting about that is that platform, as far as I'm concerned, is the Facebook of business.
Oh, yeah.
Think about it. You're now looking at 3-minute nuggets of data. That we can make the argument that psychologically we're losing attention, but I'm not getting into that. My point is, we're in a place now where ingestion of data better be clear, succinct, and gone. Move. Keeping the engine rolling and so forth. That's a talent.
Yeah.
That's a talent. Like, I need a 45-minute referendum in order to be able to convey a clear thought, because I'm still of the Carl Icahn school.
Right. Right.
But there's craft in that. It's why I bring it up is that that's where I see like the marketing conduit. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, again, like when I was saying earlier about that, about how, again, everything used to be so siloed. Everyone used to have their department, and it was very clear what everyone's role was. That is very much in the air. And for sure, again, I actually wanted to get your thoughts on the direction of AI. The fact that you're saying, because these are early days of it.
Yeah.
This technology has just started. My joke, when people are like, well, where are we? How far have we come with AI? How smart is AI? And I'm like, my joke is, I have to explain it. It take me a while to say, like, we're at like a horse.
Yeah.
We're at about a horse right now, which is pretty damn fucking smart, by the way.
Right.
Like, I mean, that's not bad for like, but again, so very early days. And so, we're just trying to gauge, like, you and I are really, part of this discussion in a way is around, okay, well, we're seeing this trend towards entrepreneurship. Well, part of that, again, is just because it's just a push towards this gig economy.
Yep.
And again, this more and more, these technologies are going to displace traditional jobs.
Yep.
In trying to predict the future, I tend to just say, okay, well, where's AI's mega strength? And to me, it's pattern recognition. Okay, so what are all the jobs that are pattern recognition, and what are all the things that are human, unique, that technology is going to have trouble keeping up with?
Sure.
And
that's a great point.
And I think this is why, again, because marketing at the end of the day, from a business perspective, always boils down to insight, and creativity.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, well, what, I think, okay, this is how I project or understand or think I understand my target audience for whom I'm trying to sell this product. Okay, here's what I think might resonate with them. And more and more though, I mean, it is absolutely insane, how much more, like, again, using Facebook as an example of being able to do dynamic ads. And they're able to sort of generate content themselves. Like, where is my role? And my role, where it is today, is not going to be the same in 5 years from now by far. Like, we don't know.
No, that's absolutely true. And I guess I would ask you to think about it differently. So you're absolutely right. Pattern identification, certainly a critical variable in the larger equation, no doubt. I would also say that, AI, cognitive, predictive, advanced analytics, natural language processing, RPA, Bitcoin, blockchain, Ethereum. There's this overarching ability to get lost in all of that. I would say the greatest way to kind of understand it and appreciate it would be it's just a new way of seeing a problem. Mm-hmm. And by extension, it's just another tool or another arrow in your quiver to effectively solve a problem. I'm not an advocate, I'm not a proponent of the belief or the idea that AI or cognitive or predictive analytics or any of those things are going to ostensibly bump people out of a job.
I don't think so.
I'll explain where I mean that. Now, will it increase will it increase efficiency at an operational level wherein some people may be displaced? Yes. Is that removing of jobs in the short term? To some degree, yes. However, I don't think it's going to displace the need for human oversight from a quality assurance, quality control perspective in the long term.
Absolutely.
I think that those who are in business, those who are in a gig economy, those who are realizing that there is an overarching paradigm shift that's happening professionally, they would do well to double down on increasing their core competencies and mind share by way of AI, machine learning. Don't be scared of it.
Oh, no.
Run towards it, because again, if you recognize that at the end of the day, it's your perspective that the client's buying into, but using AI as a mechanism to facilitate, then you never inherently become obsolete. Yeah. You will never be outworked by way of a robot. You are the bot.
Right.
The bot, that the actual method, the platform becomes a substantive extension of your core domain expertise, not vice versa.
No, I agree with you 100%. You can never, because going back to the fact again that when you say, like, I love the business of business, right? This whole thing is this huge and very organic machinery.
Yeah.
But you can the most valuable asset, and the part of that equation that you can never remove is the people.
Yes.
It revolves around people and serves our needs and interests. And the second that it doesn't, it no longer becomes economically of interest.
Correct. That's right.
So you'll never. I agree with you wholeheartedly. There's any of those doomsday. So with AI, the only doomsday scenario again is it's more misuse through authoritarian controls.
Yeah.
It's really something like along those lines. It's not like the machine, the intelligence. So I agree, and the way you describe it as a sort of a tool, another arrow in your quill, I think is absolutely bang on.
And to add some substantive context around this, AI has been around since the 70s.
Yeah.
We're now in 2018, and humankind hasn't become obsolete. Now, we can argue that advances have kind of exponentially taken a different shape in 2018 than they were at that time. But relative to that time, this was so far detached from human conception, which is ultimately why it never ever got it never dug in with the right teeth to become anything more than it was. My point in saying that is, the one thing that you can always count on within the human condition is an irrevocable commitment to meeting expectations and exceeding them. And that's why I have personally, that's why I'm doubling down on the platform, because I think the platform, if simplified properly, is ingestible by, and again, it's not age specific. I could take a 90-year-old person and teach them theory. I can take a 10-year-old and teach them theory. What I can't do is teach them how to think. And I think that doubling down and reinvesting into your core competency and realizing how to revamp your analytic inclination, that's always a worthwhile investment. And think about it from an employer perspective, right? Because if you're not willing to invest in you, why the hell should I?
You know what? In some ways, what I think kind of funny is like your, in a way, in part, like sort of a core of your message is this very sort of simple truism and dose of reality. That being that everything, no matter what that outcome that you think, whether it's some sort of doomsday scenario or it's like this is going to be epic, it's never quite as bad or it's never quite as good as planned. And this is the human nature, because we are flawed, and so we never do anything right. And this is probably actually, by the way, my big refute to all people who get caught up in conspiracy theories, these like theories. It's like, it's so funny how people are compelled to believe the lesser likely scenario than the more likely sort of given one. For some reason, we're compelled to.
It's more entertaining.
It's more entertaining, exactly.
Yeah. Like, I need to be able to subscribe that AI is going to translate to a robot who's going to fight Will Smith. That absolutely needs to be the reality, because that sells.
Yeah, that's more exciting.
Here's the reality. The reality is you still own this, and you can do this, and you haven't been displaced yet. But if you know that something's effectively could happen, why are we committed to waiting until the 11th hour why do we wait till we're thirsty to dig the well? Know now that it's a potential concern, double down on you. Yeah, I'm not asking you to invest in a platform, invest in you.
Right. And
get your head straight and be relevant by way of what you're willing to put into it, right? Mm-hmm. Someone said it's great, and I bring this up because you talked about like simplifying an overarching message. Someone once said to me, they're like, Yoseph, you know what? You're not here to give people a rose. You're here to give them a reality check. I said, yeah, I mean, look, if you wanted that, like, it's business, right? Like Carl Icahn says, right? If you want a friend, get a dog.
I don't know. I'd be pretty happy if you gave me a rose.
Well, I appreciate that too. I mean, I do clean up well, but admittedly, I mean, that's it. I'm in the reality check business.
There you go. Yeah. And I'm in the business of making subjects like business compliance sexy.
Yeah.
This is why we got Yoseph here giving out roses.
Good luck with that.
To make business compliance a sexy subject.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Man, no. So, any idea when the book Hubris is coming out?
Yes, I'm really stoked. Its anticipated release is going to be in Q1 of 19. We've finalized everything that we needed to do with the publisher. We're going to be drafting up. The manuscript is all prepped and ready to go. It's going to be submitted to editor for secondary edits. So it's exciting. One of the key things that's interesting also is that I don't know if you guys have him over there in Canada. I think you mentioned that you do. Bill Maher.
Sure.
So people from Bill Maher's team are projected to be interested in a potential discussion around the book, and especially now with a lot of, this kind of laissez-faire, kind of laxed view of business, and misappropriation and so forth happening in the U.S. It seems like an opportune time to kind of bring somebody in to have a discussion around accountability in the marketplace and in the business culture. So yeah, it's an exciting time for me, and I'm certainly beyond humbled.
Cool, exciting stuff. Cool. And any speaking engagements coming up?
Yes, super stoked. 2019 is positioning to be a very, very good year. I have, I have a really, really core group of people that I'm working with who have been really meaningful, both on the Canadian side as well as on the US. It happens to be, by the way, just FYI, I'm the biggest lover of Canada and of a lot of places that I go. I think it has a lot to do with Tim Hose, but and he used to be Mr. Sub, but
oh, interesting.
May they rest in peace. Yeah, we haven't seen them, but just overall, I mean, there's a lot of appetite on kind of recalibrating executive and cognitive decision making and mindset, and seeing how that aligns with a lot of the narrative in my book. Because I'm, accountability, it's not a standalone. It's not a siloed activity. And when I think about that from the marketing perspective, I always think about like putting a messaging together on behalf of a client. I come back to function over form. Historically, it's been very okay with putting optics at the forefront of why somebody should be doing business with a client of yours. Whereas I think now, at least my experience has been with people like you and other marketing people who are just, changing the game and flipping the script. They've come to effectively realize that when you're good at something, you tell everybody. When you're great at something, they'll tell you. And that comes by way of function over form versus form over function. And that's why I'm so excited to see where you guys pivot, where I pivot, and seeing, increasingly where that nexus, that S curve, so to speak, intersects. Because these are times where everybody's looking to make a differentiation. How do you offset that? How do you differentiate within the larger differentiation wave? I'm looking to you guys for lessons learned. So
sure, yeah. Well, I mean, and I'll be honest that it's a lot of it is in flux. I find, and it's hard to, I'm no better necessarily as a predictor. Where to double down, where your emphasis should be for tomorrow. Things are moving fast, and we all know it. I'm like you in the sense that I'm excited. I'm very excited by the potential and the opportunities and the new things that I can at least immediately see on the horizon. Like you too, I think there's this great opportunity for a rethinking and change in mindset, and how what I've often said is the industrial age model worked great for for a couple hundred years maybe, but it is certainly due for a revisit. This is how the economy at large always functions like that. That's how it's through natural pressures and changes and evolutions. It always goes like this, and this is a period of hyper acceleration, and that's, I think, that core of why it's very difficult. But that's what's also so exciting, and I agree with you. It's like get engaged with it. Figure out exactly. I think what your message is right. To figure out, identify your core competencies, double down on those, invest in yourself.
Don't be complacent.
Correct, and don't be complicit. Right? Yeah, feel free to write it because it's unwritten. I agree. Right. Yeah,
don't be complacent. Just because something worked yesterday doesn't effectively mean that it has to be what defines you tomorrow. And it's especially interesting because I hear a lot of people saying, well, I'm new to this. I'm a startup. I'm not established. I haven't captured enough of the industry market share, and so forth and so on. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. You should go into every situation, every discussion, every client engagement fully expecting to be underestimated.
Yeah.
There's beauty in that. Because when you've lowered the bar of expectation that low, there's only one direction to go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a win, right? That's how I see it. I mean, that's how I kind of propose it, and that's what's been meaningful to me. When you mind your business, life is way less stressful. When you do what you do and do it for the right reasons and do it the best way you can, that's it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, good things flow from that. You can't. Yeah, exactly. And that's the other interesting thing is the sort of intersect now between sort of talk of both best business practices, but both the individual level. That people are really reevaluating not just business but life, the whole sort of equation of work-life play. Richard, I credit Richard Brunson a lot for that whole sort of perspective of not distinguishing, sort of pushing back against this notion of work-life balance. So yeah, no, very interesting time. Sounds like a fascinating book. I'm looking forward to its release in Q1 of this coming year. And man, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming on the show and taking some time to talk with me.
I'm beyond humbled, and I really am. And one of the things that I would encourage your listeners to really appreciate. Hopefully, the biggest takeaway is whether you're in marketing, whether you're in business, no matter what vertical or line of service you're in, your job is to not fix crazy or stupid.
Yeah,
that's not the business we're hired to do. Our job is we can explain it to you, but we can't understand it for you. And why I say that is because that is in direct alignment to I'm only as good as what you're willing to invest in reciprocity. And I think that for me, I hope anyway, that was the biggest takeaway from this podcast, is that we're not here to solve the world's problems. It's easy. It's very hard to tell people what they're doing is wrong, but it's a lot easier to tell them what they're doing it can be done better, and here's how. And I think that's where the synthesis, the nexus of what we talked about really was resonant for me. And that's hopefully what I get to take away from this podcast to my followers and to my content. And I hope that was meaningful to you as well.
Yeah, no, this has been a lot of fun. Yeah, no, I think hopefully there are some great takeaways that people can, just in terms of how they think about their business themselves, how they operate. And I'll put, of course, links to your LinkedIn profile and everything below when I post this video. So again, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Many, many thanks to you too as well. Thanks.
I've got big